Day 2, 9:02 a.m. We needed skim milk, toasty O's, Pop Tarts, Jello, dishwasher detergent, and something else. But I couldn't read my own writing. I stood in the supermarket aisle at 9 o'clock in the morning, bustling over my notes. A voice said, "Hey Jack, how's it hanging?" I looked up to see Ricky Morse, one of the division's heads at Xymos. "Hey Ricky, how are you?" I shook his hand, genuinely glad to see him. I was always glad to see Ricky. Tanned with blonde crew cut hair and a big grin. He could easily be taken for a surfer were it not for his Source Forge 3.1 t-shirt. Ricky was only a few years younger than I was, but he had an air of perpetual youthfulness. I'd given him his first job right out of college, and he'd rapidly moved into management. With his cheerful personality and upbeat manner, Ricky made an ideal project manager, even though he tended to underplay problems and give management unrealistic expectations about when a project would be finished. According to Julia, that had sometimes caused trouble at Xymos. Ricky tended to make promises he couldn't keep, and sometimes he didn't quite tell the truth. But he was so cheerful and appealing that everyone always forgave him. At least I always did, when he worked for me. I had become quite fond of him, and thought of him almost as a younger brother. I'd recommended him for his job at Xymos. Ricky was pushing a shopping cart filled with disposable diapers in big plastic bundles. He had a young baby at home, too. I asked him why he was shopping and not at the office. "Mary's got the flu, and the maid's in Guatemala, so I told her I'd pick up some things." "I see you've got Huggies," I said. "I always get Pampers myself. I find Huggies absorb more," he said, "and Pampers are too tight. They pinch the baby's leg. But Pampers have a layer that takes moisture away and keeps the bottom dry." I said, "I have fewer rashes with Pampers. Whenever I use them, the adhesive tabs tend to pull off, and with a big load, it tends to leak out the leg, which makes extra work for me. I don't know, I just find Huggies are higher quality." A woman glanced at us as she pushed past with her shopping cart. We started to laugh, thinking we must sound like we were in a commercial. Ricky said loudly, "So hey, how about those giants?" to the woman's back as she continued down the aisle. "Fucking A. Are they great or what?" I said, squashing myself. We laughed, then pushed our carts down the aisle together. Ricky said, "Want to know the truth? Mary likes Huggies, and that's the end of the conversation." "I know that one," I said. Ricky looked at my cart and said, "I see you buy organic skim milk." "Stop it," I said. "How are things at the office?" "You know they're pretty damn good," he said. "The technology's coming along nicely, if I say so myself. We demoed for the money guys the other day, and it went well." "Julia's doing okay?" I said, as casually as I could. "Yeah, she's doing great, far as I know," Ricky said. I glanced at him. Was he suddenly reserved? Was his face set, the muscles controlled? Was he concealing something? I couldn't tell. "Actually, I really see her," Ricky said. She's not around much these days. I don't see much of her either, I said. Yeah, she's spending a lot of time out at the fab complex. That's where the action is now. Ricky glanced quickly at me. You know, because of the new fabrication processes. The Xymos fab buildings had been completed in record time. Considering how complex it was, the fabrication building was where they assembled molecules from individual atoms, sticking the molecule fragments together like Lego blocks. Much of this work was carried out in a vacuum and required extremely strong magnetic fields. So the fab building had tremendous pump assemblies and powerful chillers to cool the magnets. But according to Julia, a lot of the technology was specific to that building, nothing like it had ever been built before. I said, "It's amazing they got the building up so fast." "Well, we keep the pressure on. Molecular dynamics is breathing down our necks. We've got our fab up and running, and we've got patent applications by the truckload. But those guys at Moldine and Nanotech can't be far behind us. A few months, maybe 6 months, if we're lucky." "So you're doing molecular assembly at the plant now," I said. "You got it, Jack. Full-bore molecular assembly. We have been for a few weeks now." I didn't know Julia was interested in that stuff. With her background in psychology, I had always regarded Julia as a people person. She's taking real interest in the technology, I can tell you. Also, they're doing a lot of programming up there too, he said. You know, iteratives, cycles, as they refine the manufacturing? I nodded. "What kind of programming?" I said, distributed processing, multi-agent nets. That's how we keep the individual units coordinated, working together. This is all to make the medical camera? Yes, he paused, among other things. He glanced at me uneasily, as if he might be breaking his confidentiality agreement. "You don't have to say," I said. No, he said quickly. "Jeez, you and I go way back, Jack." He slapped me on the shoulder. "And you got a spouse in management. I mean, what the hell?" But he still looked uneasy. His face didn't match his words. And his eyes slid away from me when he said the word spouse. The conversation was coming to an end, and I felt filled with tension. The kind of awkward tension when you think another guy knows something and isn't telling you. Because he's embarrassed. Because he doesn't know how to put it. Because he doesn't want to get involved. Because it's too dangerous, even to mention. Because he thinks it's your job to figure it out for yourself. Especially when it's something about your wife. Like she's screwing around. He's looking at you like you're the walking wounded. It's Night of the Living Dead. But he won't tell you. In my experience, guys never tell other guys when they know something about their wives. But women always tell other women if they know of a husband's infidelity. That's just how it is. But I was feeling so tense I wanted to. "Hey, look at the time," Ricky said, giving me a big grin. "I'm late. Mary'll kill me. I've got to run." She's already annoyed because I have to spend the next few days at the fab facility. So I'll be out of town while the maid's gone. He shrugged. You know how it is. Yeah, I do. Good luck. Hey man, take care. We shook hands, murmured another goodbye. Ricky rolled his cart around the corner of the aisle and was gone. Sometimes you can't think about painful things. You can't make your mind focus on them. Your brain just slips away. No thank you. Let's change the subject. That was happening to me now. I couldn't think about Julia, so I started thinking about what Ricky had told me about their fabrication plant, and I decided it probably made sense, even though it went against the conventional wisdom about nanotechnology. There was a long-standing fantasy among nanotechnologists that once somebody figured out how to manufacture at the atomic level, it would be like running the 4-minute mile. Everybody who would do it, unleashing a flood of wonderful molecular creations, rolling off assembly lines all around the world. In a matter of days, human life would be changed by this marvelous new technology as soon as somebody figured out how to do it. But of course, that would never happen. The very idea was absurd, because in essence, molecular manufacturing wasn't so different from computer manufacturing, or flow valve manufacturing, or automobile manufacturing, or any other kind of manufacturing. It took a while to get it right. In fact, assembling atoms to make a new molecule was closely analogous to compiling a computer program from individual lines of code, and computer code never compiled the first time out. The programmers always had to go back and fix the lines, and even after it was compiled, a computer program never ever worked right the first time, or the second time, or the 100th time. It had to be debugged, and debugged again and again and again. I always believed it would be the same with these manufactured molecules. They'd have to be debugged again and again before they worked right. And if Zymos wanted flocks of molecules working together, they'd also have to debug the way the molecules communicated with each other. However, limited that communication was, because once the molecules communicated, you had a primitive network to organize it. You would probably program a distributed net, of the kind I had been developing at Mediatronics. So I could perfectly well imagine them doing programming along with the manufacturing. But I couldn't see Julius hanging around while they did it. The fab facility was far from the Zymos headquarters. It was literally in the middle of nowhere, out in the desert near Tonopah, Nevada. And Julia didn't like to be in the middle of nowhere. I was sitting in the pediatrician's waiting room because the baby was due for her next round of immunizations. There were 4 mothers in the room, bouncing sick kids on their laps, while the older children played on the floor. The mothers all talked to each other and studiously ignored me. I was getting used to this. A guy at home, a guy in a setting like the pediatrician's office, was an unusual thing. But it also meant that something was wrong. There was probably something wrong with the guy. He couldn't get a job. Maybe he was fired for alcoholisms or drugs. Maybe he was a bum. Whatever the reason, it wasn't normal for a man to be in the pediatrician's office in the middle of the day. So the other mothers pretended I wasn't there. Except they shot me the occasional worried glance, as if I might be sneaking up on them to rape them while their backs were turned. Even the nurse, Gloria, seemed suspicious. She glanced at the baby in my arms, who wasn't crying, and was hardly sniffling. What seems to be the problem? I said we were here for immunizations. She's been here before? Yes. She had been coming to the doctor's since she was born. Are you related? Yes. I was the father. Eventually, we were ushered in. The doctor shook hands with me, was very friendly, never asked why I was there instead of my wife, or the housekeeper. He gave 2 injections. Amanda howled. I bounced her on my shoulder, comforted her. She may have a little swelling, a little local redness. Call me if it's not gone in 48 hours. Then I was back in the waiting room, trying to get out my credit card to pay the bill, while the baby cried. And that was when Julia called. Hi, what are you doing? She must have heard the baby screaming. Paying the pediatricians. Bad time? Kind of. Okay, listen. I just wanted to say I have an early night. Finally. So I'll be home for dinner. What do you say I'd pick up on my way home? That'd be great, I said. Eric's soccer practice ran late. It was getting dark on the field. The coach always ran practice late. I paced the sidelines, trying to decide whether to complain. It was so hard to know when you were coddling your kid, and when you were legitimately protecting them. Nicole called her on her cell to say that her play rehearsal was over, and why hadn't I picked her up? Where was I? I said I was still with Eric and asked if she could catch a ride with anybody. Dad, she said, exasperated. You think I had asked her to crawl home? Hey, I'm stuck. Very sarcastic. Whatever. Watch that tone, young lady. But a few minutes later, soccer was abruptly cancelled. A big green maintenance truck pulled onto the field, and 2 men came out, wearing masks and big rubber gloves, with spray cans on their backs. They were going to spray weed killer or something, and everybody had to stay off the field overnight. I called Nicole back and said we would pick her up. When? We're on our way now. From the little creep's practice? Come on, Nick. Why does he always come first? He doesn't always come first. Yes, he does. He's a little creep. Nicole. Sorry. See you in a few minutes. I clicked off. Kids are more advanced these days. The teenage years now start at 11. By 5:30, the kids were home, raiding the fridge. Nicole was eating a big chunk of string cheese. I told her to stop. It would ruin her dinner. Then I went back to setting the table. When is dinner? Soon. Mom's bringing it home. Uh-huh. She disappeared for a few minutes, and then she came back. She says she's sorry she didn't call, but she's going to be late. What? I was pouring water into the glasses on the table. She's sorry she didn't call, but she's going to be late. I just talked to her. Jesus, it was irritating. I tried never to show my irritations around the kids. But sometimes it slipped out. I sighed. Okay. I'm really hungry now, Dad. Get your brother and get into the car, I said. We are going to the drive-in. Later that night, as I was carrying the baby to bed, my elbow brushed against a photograph on the living room bookshelf. It clattered to the floor. I stooped to pick it up. It was a picture of Julia and Eric in Sun Valley when he was 4. They were both in snowsuits. Julia was helping him learn to ski and smiling radiantly. Next to it was a photo of Julia and me on our 11th wedding anniversary in Kona. I was in a loud Hawaiian shirt and she had colorful layers around her neck. And we were kissing at sunset. That was a great trip. In fact, we were pretty sure Amanda was conceived there. I remember Julia came home from work one day and said, Honey, remember how you said my ties were dangerous? I said, yes. And she said, well, let me put it this way. It's a girl. And I was so startled, the soda I was drinking went up my nose. And we both started to laugh. Then a picture of Julia making cupcakes with Nicole, who was so young, she'd sat on the kitchen counter, and her legs didn't reach the edge. She couldn't have been more than a year and a half old. Nicole was frowning with concentration as she wielded a huge spoon of dough, making a fine mess while Julia tried not to laugh. In a photo of us hiking in Colorado, Julia holding the hand of 6-year-old Nicole, while I carried Eric on my shoulders, my shirt collar dark with sweat or worse. If I remembered that day right, Eric must have been about 2. He was still in diapers. I remember he thought it was fun to cover my eyes while I carried him on the trail. The hiking photo had slipped inside its frame, so it stood at an angle. I tapped the frame to try and straighten it, but it didn't move. I noticed that several of the other pictures were faded, or the emulsions were sticking to the glass. No one had bothered to take care of these pictures. The baby snuffled in my arms, rubbing her eyes with her fists. It was time for bed. I put the pictures back on the shelf. They were old images from another, happier time, from another life. They seemed to have nothing to do with me anymore. Everything was different now. The world was different now. I left the table set for dinner that night, a silent rebuke. Julia saw it when she got home around 10. I'm sorry, hon. I know you were busy, I said. I was. Please forgive me. I do, I said. You're the best. She blew me a kiss from across the room. I'm going to take a shower, she said, and she headed off down the hallway. I watched her go. On the way down the hall, she looked into the baby's room, and then darted in. A moment later, I heard her cooing and the baby gurgling. I got out of my chair and walked down the hall after her. In the darkened nursery, She was holding the baby up, nuzzling her nose. I said, "Julia, you woke her up." "No, I didn't. She was awake. Weren't you, little honey bunny? You were awake, weren't you, Poopsie Doopsie?" The baby rubbed her eyes with tiny fists and yawned. She certainly appeared to have been awakened. Julia turned to me in the darkness. I didn't wake her up. "Why are you looking at me that way?" "What way?" "You know what way. That accusing way." "I'm not accusing you of anything." The baby started to whimper and then to cry. Julia touched her diaper. "I think she's wet," she said, and handed her to me as she walked out of the room. "You do it, Mr. Perfect." Now there was tension between us. After I changed the baby and put her back to bed, I heard Julia come out of the shower, banging a door. Whenever Julia started banging doors, it was a sign for me to come and mollify her. But I didn't feel like it tonight. I was annoyed. She'd awakened the baby, and I was annoyed by her unreliability, saying she'd be home early, and never calling to say she wouldn't. I was scared that she had become so unreliable because she was distracted by a new love, or she just didn't care about her family anymore. I didn't know what to do about all this, but I didn't feel like smoothing the tension between us. I just let her bang the doors. She slammed her sliding closet door so hard the wood cracked. She swore. That was another sign. I was supposed to come running. I went back to the living room and sat down. I picked up the book I was reading and stared at the page. I tried to concentrate, but of course I couldn't. I was angry, and I listened to her banging around in the bedroom. If she kept it up, she'd wake Eric, and then I would have to deal with him. I hoped it wouldn't go that far. Eventually, the noise stopped. She had probably gotten into bed. If so, she would soon be asleep. Julie could go to sleep when we were fighting. I never could. I stayed up, pacing and angry, trying to settle myself down. When I finally came to bed, Julie was fast asleep. I slipped between the covers and rolled over on my side away from her. It was 1 o'clock in the morning when the baby began to scream. I groped for the light, knocked over the alarm clock, which turned the clock radio on, blaring rock and roll. I swore, fumbled in the dark, finally got the bedside light on, turned the radio off. The baby was still screaming. "What's the matter with her?" Julia said sleepily. "I don't know." I got out of bed, shaking my head, trying to wake up. I went into the nursery and flicked on the light. The room seemed very bright, the clown wallpaper very yellow and burning. Out of nowhere, I thought, why doesn't she want yellow placemats when she painted the whole nursery yellow? The baby was standing up in her crib, holding on to the rails and howling, her mouth wide open, her breath coming in jagged gasps. Tears were running down her cheeks. I held my arms out to her, and she reached for me, and I comforted her. I thought it must be a nightmare. I comforted her, rocked her gently. She continued to scream, unrelenting. Maybe something was hurting her. Maybe something in her diaper. I checked her body. That was when I saw an angry red rash on her belly, extending in welts around her back, and up toward her neck. Julia came in. "Can't you stop it?" she said. I said, "There's something wrong," and I showed her the rash. Has she got a fever? I touched Amanda's head. She was sweaty and hot, but that could be from the crying. The rest of her body felt cool. I don't know. I don't think so. I could see the rash on her thighs now. Was it on her thighs a moment before? I almost thought I was seeing it spread before my eyes. If it was possible, the baby screamed even louder. "Jesus," Julia said. "I'll call the doctor." "Yeah, do." By now I had the baby on her back. She screamed more, and I was looking carefully at her entire body. The rash was spreading. There was no doubt about it. And she seemed to be in terrible pain, screaming bloody murder. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm sorry," I said. "Definitely spreading." Julia came back and said she left word for the doctor. I said, "I'm not going to wait. I'm taking her to the emergency room." "Do you really think that's necessary?" she said. I didn't answer her. I just went into the bedroom to put on my clothes. Julia said, "Do you want me to come with you?" "No, stay with the kids," I said. "You sure?" "Yes." "Okay," she said. She wandered back to the bedroom. I reached for my car keys. The baby continued to scream. "I realize it's uncomfortable," the intern was saying, "but I don't think it's safe to sedate her." We were in a curtained cubicle in the emergency room. The intern was bent over my screaming daughter, looking in her ears with her instrument. By now, Amanda's entire body was bright, angry red. She looked as if she had been parboiled. I felt scared. I'd never heard of anything like this before. A baby turning bright red and screaming constantly. I didn't trust this intern, who seemed far too young to be competent. He couldn't be experienced. He didn't even look as if he shaved yet. I was jittery, shifting my right from one foot to the other. I was beginning to feel slightly crazy, because my daughter had never stopped screaming once in the last hour. It was weighing me down. The intern ignored it. I didn't know how he could. "She has no fever," he said, making notes in a chart. "But in a child this age, that doesn't mean anything. Under a year, they may not run fevers at all, even with severe infections." "Is that what this is?" I said. "An infection?" "I don't know. I'm presuming a virus because of that rash. But we should have the preliminary blood work back in." "Ah, good." A passing nurse handed him a slip of paper. He paused. Well, what?" I said, shifting my right, anxiously. He was shaking his head as he stared at the paper. He didn't answer. "Well, what?" "It's not an infection," he said. "White cell counts are all normal. Protein fractions normal. She's got no immune mobilizations at all." "What does that mean?" He was very calm. standing there, frowning and thinking. I wonder if perhaps he was just dumb. The best people weren't going into medicine anymore. Not with the HMOs running everything. This kid might be one of the new breed of dumb doctor. We have to widen the diagnostic net, he said. I'm going to order a surgical consult. A neurological consult. We have a dermo coming. We have infectious coming. That'll mean a lot of people to talk to you about your daughters. Asking the same questions over again, but that's okay, I said. I don't mind. Just, what do you think is wrong with her? I don't know, Mr. Foreman. If it's not infectious, we look for other reasons for the skin response. She hasn't traveled out of the country. No, I shook my head. No recent exposures to heavy metals or toxins? Like what? Dump sites? Industrial plants? Chemical exposure? No. Can you think of anything at all that might have caused this reaction? No, nothing. Wait, she had vaccinations yesterday. What vaccinations? I don't know. Whatever she gets for her age. You don't know what vaccinations, he said. His notebook was open, his pen poised over the page. No, for Christ's sake, I said irritably. I don't know what vaccinations. Every time she goes there, she gets another shot. You're the goddamn doctor. That's okay, Mr. Foreman, he said soothingly. I know it's stressful. If you just tell me the name of your pediatricians, I'll call him. How's that? I nodded. I wiped my hand across my forehead. I was sweating. I spelled the pediatrician's name for him, while he wrote it down in his notebook. I tried to calm down. I tried to think clearly. And all the time, my baby just screamed. Half an hour later, she went into convulsions. They started while one of the white-coated consultants was bent over her, examining her. The little body wrenched and twisted. She made retching sounds as if she was trying to vomit. Her legs jerked spastically. She began to wheeze. Her eyes rolled up into her head. I don't remember what I said or did then, but a big orderly the size of a football player came in and pushed me to one side of the cubicle and held my arms. I looked past his huge shoulder as 6 people clustered around my daughter. A nurse wearing a Bart Simpson's t-shirt was sticking a needle into her forehead. I began to shout and struggle. The orderly was yelling, "Scalvane, Scalvane, Scalvane," over and over. Finally, I realized he was saying scalp vein. He explained it was just to start an IV, that the baby had become dehydrated. That was why she was convulsing. I had talked to electrolytes, magnesium, potassium. Anyway, the convulsions stopped in a few seconds, but she continued to scream. I called it Julia. She was awake. How is she? The same. Still crying? Is that her? Yes. She could hear Amanda in the background. Oh God, she groaned. What are they saying it is? They don't know yet. Oh, the poor baby. There have been about 50 doctors in here to look at her. Is there anything I can do? I don't think so. Okay, let me know. Okay. I'm not sleeping. Okay. Shortly before dawn, the huddled consultants announced that she either had an intestinal obstruction or a brain tumor. They couldn't decide which, and they ordered an MRI. The sky was beginning to lighten when she was finally wheeled to the imaging room. The big white machine stood in the center of the room. The nurse told me it would calm the baby if I helped her prepare her, and she took the needle out of her scalp, because there couldn't be any metal during the MRI readings. Blood squirted down Amanda's face into her eye. The nurse wiped it away. Now Amanda was strapped onto the whiteboard that rolled into the depths of the machine. My daughter was staring up at the MRI in terror, still screaming. The nurse told me I could wait in the next room with a technician. I went into a room with a glass window that looked in on the MRI machine. The technician was foreign, dark. How old is she? Is it a she? Yes, she's 9 months. Quite a set of lungs on her. Yes. Here we go. He was fiddling at his knobs and dials, hardly looking at my daughter. Amanda was completely inside the machine. Her subs sounded tiny over the microphone. The technicians flicked a switch, and the pump began to chatter. It made a lot of noise, but I could still hear my daughter screaming. And then abruptly she stopped. She was completely silent. Uh-oh, I said. I looked at the technician and the nurse. Their faces registered shock. We all thought the same thing, that something terrible had happened. My heart began to pound. The technicians hastily shut down the pumps, and we hurried back into the room. My daughter was lying there, still strapped down, breathing heavily, but apparently fine. She blinked, her eyes slowly as if dazed. Already her skin was noticeably a lighter shade of pink, with patches of normal color. The rash was fading right before our eyes. I'll be damned, the technician said. Back in the emergency room, they wouldn't let Amanda go home. The surgeons still thought she had a tumor or a bowel emergency, and they wanted to keep her in the hospital for observation. But the rash continued to clear steadily. Over the next hour, the pink color faded and vanished. No one could understand what had happened, and the doctors were uneasy. The scalp vein 4 was back in on the other side of her forehead. But Amanda took a bottle of formula, guzzling it down hungrily, while I held her. She was staring up at me with her usual hypnotic feeling stare. She really seemed to be fine. She fell asleep in my arms. I sat there for another hour, then began to make noises about how I had to get back to my kids. I had to get them to school. And not long afterward, the doctors announced another victory for modern medicine and sent me home with her. Amanda slept soundly all the way and didn't wake when I got her out of her car seat. The night sky was turning gray when I carried her up the driveway and into the house. Day 3, 6:07 a.m. The house was silent. The kids were still asleep. I found Julia standing in the dining room, looking out the window at the backyard. The sprinklers were on, hissing and clicking. Julia held a cup of coffee and stared out the window, unmoving. I said, "We're back." She turned. "She's okay?" I held out the baby to her. "Seems to be." "Thank God," she said. "I was so worried, Jack." But she didn't approach Amanda and didn't touch her. I was so worried. Her voice was strange, distant. She didn't really sound worried. She sounded formal, like someone reciting the rituals of another culture that they didn't really understand. She took a sip from her coffee cup. "I couldn't sleep all night," she said. "I was so worried. I felt awful. God." Her eyes flickered to my face, then away. She looked guilty. "Want to hold her?" Julia shook her head and nodded to the coffee cup in her hand. "Not right now," she said. "I have to check the sprinklers. They're overwatering my roses." And she walked into the backyard. I watched her go out in the back and stand looking at the sprinklers. She glanced back at me, then made a show of checking the timer box on the wall. She opened the lid and looked inside. I didn't get it. The gardeners had adjusted the sprinkler timers just last week. Maybe they hadn't done it right. Amanda snuffled in my arms. I took her into the nursery to change her and put her back in bed. When I returned, I saw Julia in the kitchen, talking on her cell phone. This was another new habit of hers. She didn't use the house phone much anymore. She used her cell. When I had asked her about it, she'd said it was just easier because she was calling long distance a lot, and the company paid her cellular bills. I slowed my approach and walked on the carpet. I heard her say, "Yes, damn it, of course I do. But we have to be careful now." She looked up and saw me coming. Her tone immediately changed. "Okay, huh? Look, Carol, I think we can handle that with a phone call to Frankfurt. Follow up with a fax and let me know how he responds, all right?" As she snapped the phone shut, I came into the kitchen. "Jack, I hate to leave before the kids are up, but you've got to go?" "I'm afraid so. Something's come up at work." I glanced at my watch. It was 6:15. "Okay," she said. "So will you, the kids?" "Sure, I'll handle everything." "Thanks, I'll call you later." And she was gone. I was so tired. I wasn't thinking clearly. The baby was still asleep, and with luck, she'd sleep several hours more. My housekeeper, Maria, came in at 6:30 and put out the breakfast bowls. The kids ate and I drove them to school. I was trying hard to stay awake. I yawned. It was sitting on the front seat next to me. He yawned too. "Sleepy today?" He nodded. "Those men kept waking me up," he said. "What men?" "The men that came in the house last night." "What men?" I said. "The vacuum men," he said. "They vacuumed everything, and they vacuumed up the ghost." From the back seat, Nicole snickered. "The ghost?" I said. "I think you are dreaming, son." Lately, Eric had been having vivid nightmares that often woke him in the night. I was pretty sure it was because Nicole let him watch horror movies with her, knowing they would upset him. Nicole was at the age where Her favorite movies featured masked killers who murdered teenagers after they had sex. It was the old formula. You have sex, you die. But it wasn't appropriate for Eric. I've spoken to her many times about letting him see them. No, Dad, it wasn't a dream, Eric said, yawning again. The men were there. A whole bunch of them. Uh-huh. And what was the ghost? He was a ghost, all silver and shimmery, except he didn't have a face. Uh-huh. By now, we were pulling up at the school, and Nicole was saying I had to pick her up at 4:15 instead of 3:45 because she had a chorus rehearsal after class, and Eric was saying he wasn't going to his pediatrician's appointment if he had to get a shot. I repeated the timeless mantra of all parents, we'll see. The two kids piled out of the car, dragging their backpacks behind them. They both had backpacks that weighed about 20 pounds. I never got used to this. Kids didn't have huge backpacks when I was their age. We didn't have backpacks at all. Now it seemed all the kids had them. You saw little second graders bent over like Sherpas, dragging themselves through the school doors under the weight of their packs. Some of the kids had their packs on rollers, hauling them like luggage at the airport. I didn't understand any of this. The world was becoming digital. Everything was smaller and lighter, but kids at school lugged more weight than ever. A couple of months ago, at a parents' meeting, I'd asked about it, and the principal said, yes, it's a big problem. We're all concerned. And then changed the subject. I didn't get that either. If they were all concerned, why didn't they do something about it? But of course, that's human nature. Nobody does anything until it's too late. We put the stoplight at the intersections after the kid is killed. I drove home again, through sluggish morning traffic. I was thinking I might get a couple of hours of sleep. It was the only thing on my mind. Maria woke me up around 11, shaking my shoulder insistently. Mr. Furman, Mr. Furman. I was groggy. What is it? The baby. I was immediately awake. What about her? You see the baby, Mr. Furman. She made a gesture, rubbing her shoulder and arm. She's all what? You see the baby, Mr. Furman. I staggered out of bed and went into the nursery. Amanda was standing up in her crib, holding on to the railing. She was bouncing and smiling happily. Everything seemed normal, except for the fact that her entire body was a uniform purple-blue color, like a big bruise. Oh, Jesus, I said. I couldn't take another episode at the hospital. I couldn't take more white-coated doctors who didn't tell you anything. I couldn't take being scared all over again. I was still drained from the night before. The thought that there was something wrong with my daughter wrenched my stomach. I went over to Amanda, who gurgled with pleasure, smiling up at me. She stretched one hand towards me, grasping air, her signal for me to pick her up. So I picked her up. She seemed fine, immediately grabbing my hair and trying to pull off my glasses, the way she always did. I felt relieved. Even though I could now see her skin better, it looked bruised. It was the color of a bruise, except it was absolutely uniform everywhere on her body. Amanda looked like she'd been dipped in dye. The evenness of the color was alarming. I decided I had to call the doctor in the emergency room after all. I fished in my pocket for his card, while Amanda tried to grab my glasses. I dialed one-handed. I could do pretty much everything one-handed. I got right through. He sounded surprised. "Oh," he said, "I was just about to call you. How's your daughter feeling?" "Well, she seems to feel fine," I said, jerking my head back, so Amanda couldn't get my glasses. She was giggling. It was a game now. "She's fine," I said, "but the thing is, has she by any chance had bruising?" "Yes," I said. "As a matter of fact, she has. That's why I was calling you." "The bruising is all over her body, uniformly?" "Yes," I said. "Pretty much. Why do you ask?" "Well," the doctor said, "all her lab work has come back, and it's all normal. Completely normal. Healthy child. The only thing we are still waiting on is the MRI report. But the MRI is broken down. They say it'll be a few days." I couldn't keep ducking and reaving. I put Amanda back in her crib while I talked. She didn't like that, of course, and scrunched up her face, preparing to cry. I gave her her Cookie Monster toy, and she sat down and played with that. I knew Cookie Monster was good for about 5 minutes. "Anyway," the doctor was saying, "I'm glad to hear she's doing well." I said that I was glad too. There was a pause. The doctor coughed. "Mr. Foreman, I noticed on your hospital admissions form you said your occupation was software engineer?" "That's right." "Does that mean you are involved with manufacturing?" "No, I do program development." "And where do you do that work? In the valley?" "You don't work in the factory, for example?" "No, I work in an office." "I see." A pause. "May I ask where?" "Actually, at the moment, I'm unemployed." "I see. All right. How long has that been?" 6 months." "I see." A short pause. "Well, okay. I just wanted to clear that up." I said, "Why?" "I'm sorry." "Why are you asking me those questions?" "Oh, they're on the form." "What form?" I said. "I filled out all the forms at the hospital." "This is another form," he said. "It's an OHS inquiry. Office of Health and Safety." I said, "What's this all about?" "There's been another case reported," he said, "that's very similar to your daughter's." "Where?" "Sacramento General." "When?" 5 days ago." "But it's a completely different situation. This case involved a 42-year-old naturalist sleeping out in the Sierras, some wildflower expert. There was a particular kind of flower, or something. Anyway, he was hospitalized in Sacramento, and he had the same clinical course as your daughter. Sudden, unexplained onset, no fever, painful erythematous reaction. And an MRI stopped it? "I don't know if he had an MRI," he said, "but apparently this syndrome, whatever it is self-limited. Very sudden onset, and very abrupt. determination. He's okay now? The naturalist. He's fine. A couple of days of bruising and nothing more. Good, I said. I'm glad to hear it. I thought you'd want to know, he said. Then he said he might be calling me again with some more questions, and would that be all right? I said he could call whenever he wanted. He asked me to call if there was any change in Amanda, and I said I would, and I hung up. Amanda had abandoned Cookie Monster and was standing in the crib, holding onto the railing with one hand and reaching for me with the other, her little fingers clutching air. I picked her up. In an instant, she had my glasses off. I grabbed for them as she squealed with pleasure. Amanda. But too late. She threw them on the floor. I blinked. I don't see well without my glasses. These were wire frames. Hard to see now. I got down on my hands and knees, still holding the baby, and swept my hands across the floor in circles, hoping to touch the glass. I didn't. I squinted, edged forward, swept my hands again. Still nothing. Then I saw a glint of light underneath the crib. I set the baby down and crawled under the crib, retrieved the glasses and put them on. In the process, I banged my head on the crib, dropped down low again, and I found myself staring at the electrical outlet on the wall underneath the crib. A small plastic box was plugged into the outlet. I pulled it out and looked at it. It was a 2-inch cube, a surge suppressor, by the look of it. An ordinary commercial product, made in Thailand. The input-output voltages were molded into the plastic. A white label ran across the bottom, reading Prop SSVT, with a barcode. It was one of those stickers that companies put on their inventory. I turned the cube over in my hand. Where had this come from? I had been in charge of the house for the last 6 months. I knew what was where, and certainly Amanda didn't need a surge suppressor in her room. You only needed that for sensitive electronic equipment, like computers. I got to my feet and looked around the room to see what else was different. To my surprise, I realized that everything was different, but just slightly different. Amanda's nightlight had Winnie the Pooh characters printed on the shade. I always kept Tigger facing forward at her crib, because Tigger was her favorite. Now Eeyore faced the crib. Amanda's changing pad was stained in one corner. I always kept the stain bottom left. Now it was top right. I kept her diaper rash ointments on the counter to the left, just out of her reach. Now they were too close. She could grab them. And there was more. The maid came in behind me. Mariah, I said, did you clean this room? No, Mr. Furman. But the room is different, I said. She looked around and shrugged. No, Mr. Furman, the same. No, I insisted. It's different. Look. I pointed to the lampshade, the changing cloth. Different. She shrugged again. Okay, Mr. Furman. I read confusion in her face. Either she didn't follow what I was saying, or she thought I was crazy. And I probably did look a little crazy. A grown man obsessing about a Winnie the Pooh lampshade. I showed her the cube in my hand. Have you seen this before? She shook her head. No. It was under the crib. I don't know, Mr. Foreman. She inspected it, turning it in her hand. She shrugged and gave it back to me. She acted casual, but her eyes were watchful. I began to feel uncomfortable. Okay, Maria. I said, never mind. She bent over to scoop up the baby. I feed her now? Yes, okay. I left the room, feeling odd. Just for the hell of it, I looked up SSVT on the net. I got links to the Sri Siva Vishnu Temple, the Waffen SS training school at Coints, Nazir Galia, for sale. Subsystems sample display technology. South Shore Vocational Technical School. Optical Varitemp cryostat systems. Solid surfacing veneer. Tiles for home floors. A band called Slingshot Venus. The Swiss Shooting Federation. And went downhill from there. I turned away from the computer. I stared out the window. Maria had given me a shopping list. The items scrawled in her difficult hand. I really should get the shopping done before I picked up the kids. But I didn't move. There were times when the relentless pace of life at home seemed to defeat me, to leave me feeling washed out and hollow. At those times, I just had to sit for a few hours. I didn't want to move, not right now. I wondered if Julia was going to call me tonight, and I wondered if she would have a different excuse. I wondered what I would do if she walked in one of these days and announced she was in love with someone else. I wondered what I would do if I still didn't have a job by then. I wondered when I would get a job again. I turned the little surge suppressor over in my hand idly, as my mind drifted. Right outside my window was a large coral tree with thick leaves and a green trunk. We had planted it as a much smaller tree not long after we moved into the house. Of course the tree guys did it, but we were all out there. Nicole had a plastic shovel and bucket. Eric was crawling around on the lawn in his diapers. Julia had charmed the workmen into staying late to finish the job. After they had all gone, I kissed her and brushed dirt from her nose. She said, "One day, it'll cover our whole house." But as it turned out, it didn't. One of the branches had broken off in a storm, so it grew a little lopsided. Cold as a soft wood, the branches break easily. It never grew to cover the house, but my memory was vivid. Staring out the window, I saw all of us again, out on the lawn, but it was just a memory, and I was very afraid. It didn't fit anymore. After working for years with multi-agent systems, you begin to see life in terms of those programs. Basically, you can think of a multi-agent environment as something like a chessboard, and the agents like chess pieces. The agents interact on the board to attain a goal, just the way the chess pieces move to win a game. The difference is that nobody is moving the agents. They interact on their own to produce the outcome. If you design the agents to have memory, they can know things about the environment. they remember where they've been on the board and what happened there. They can go back to certain places with certain expectations. Eventually, programmers say that agents have beliefs about their environment and that they are acting on those beliefs. That's not literally true, of course, but it might as well be true. It looks that way. But what's interesting is that over time, some agents developed mistaken beliefs, whether from a motivation conflict or some other reasons. They start acting inappropriately. The environment has changed, but they don't seem to know it. They repeat outmoded patterns. Their behavior is no longer reflects the reality of the chessboard. It's as if they're stuck in the past. In evolutionary programs, those agents get killed off. They have no children. In other multi-agent programs, they just get bypassed, pushed to the periphery, while the main thrust of agents moves on. Some programs have a Grim Reaper module that shifts them out from time to time and pulls them off the board. But the point is, they're stuck in their own past. Sometimes they pull themselves together and get back on track. Sometimes they don't. Thoughts like these made me very uneasy. I shifted in my chair, glanced at the clock with a sense of relief. I saw it was time to go pick up the kids. Eric did his homework in the car while we waited for Nicole to finish her play rehearsal. She came out in a bad mood. She had thought she was in line for a lead role, but instead the drama teacher had cast her in the chorus. "Only 2 lines," she said, slamming the car door. "You want to know what I say? I say, 'Look, here comes John now.' And in the second act, I say, 'That sounds pretty serious.' 2 lines." She sat back and closed her eyes. "I don't understand what Mr. Blakely's problem is." "Maybe he thinks you suck," Eric said. "Rat turd." She smacked him on the head. "Monkey butt." "That's enough," I said as I started the car. "Seatbelts." "Little stick-brained Dimrod. He doesn't know anything," Nichols said, buckling her belt. I said, "That's enough." "I know that you stink," Eric said. "P.U. That's enough, Eric." "Yeah, Eric, listen to your father and shut up." "Nicole." I shot her a glance in the rearview mirror. "Sorry." She looked on the verge of tears. I said to her, "Honey, I'm really sorry you didn't get the part you wanted. I know you wanted it badly, and it must be very disappointing." "No, I don't care." "Well, I'm sorry." "Really, Dad?" "I don't care. It's in the past. I'm moving on." And then a moment later, "You know who got it? That little suck-up Katie Richards. Mr. Blakely is just a dick." And before I could say anything, she burst into tears, sobbing loudly and hysterically. Eric looked over at me and rolled his eyes. I drove home, making a mental note to speak to Nicole about her language after dinner, when she had calmed down. I was chopping green beans so they would fit in the steamer when Eric came and stood in the kitchen doorway. "Hey, Dad, where's my MP3? "I have no idea." I could never get used to the idea that I was supposed to know where every one of their personal possessions was. Eric's Game Boy, his baseball glove, Nicole's tank tops, her bracelet. Well, I can't find it, Eric remained, standing in the doorway, not coming any closer, in case I made him help set the table. Have you looked? Everywhere, Dad. Uh-huh. You looked in your room? All over. Family room? Everywhere. In the car? Maybe you left it in the car. I didn't, Dad. You leave it in your locker at school. We don't have lockers. We have cubbies. You look in the pockets of your jacket? Dad, come on. I did all that. I need it. Since you've already looked everywhere, I won't be able to find it either, will I? Dad, would you please just help me? The pot roast had another half hour to go. I put down the knife and went into Eric's room. I looked in all the usual places. The back of his closet where the clothes were kicked into a heap. I would have to talk to Maria about that. Under the bed, behind the bed table, in the bottom drawer in the bathroom, and under the piles of stuff on his desk. Eric was right. It wasn't his room. We headed towards the family room. I glanced in at the baby's room as I passed by, and I saw it immediately. It was on the shelf beside the changing table, right alongside the tubes of baby ointment. Eric grabbed it. Hey, thanks, Dad, and he scampered off. There was no point in asking why it was in the baby's room. I went back to the kitchen and resumed chopping my green beans. Almost immediately, Dad, what I called, it doesn't work. Don't shout. He came back to the kitchen looking sulky. She broke it. Who broke it? Amanda. She drooled on it or something. And she broke it. It's not fair. You checked the battery? He gave me a pitying look. Course, Dad. I told you. She broke it. It's not fair. I doubted his MP3 player was broken. These things were solid-state devices. No moving parts. And it was too large for the baby to handle. I dumped the green beans on the steamer tray and held out my hand. Give it to me. We went into the garage and I got out my toolbox. Eric watched my every move. I had a full set of the small tools you need for computers and electronic devices. I worked quickly. 4 Phillips head screws, and the back cover came off in my hand. I found myself staring at the green circuit board. It was covered by a fine layer of grayish dust, like lint from a clothes dryer, that obscured all the electronic components. I suspected that Eric had slid into home plate, with this thing in his pocket. That was probably why it didn't work. But I looked along the edge of the plastic and saw a rubber gasket where the back fitted against the device. They'd made this thing airtight, as they should. I blew away the dust away so I could see better. I was hoping to see a loose battery connection or a memory chip that had propped up from heat. Anyway, something that would be easy to fix. I squinted at the chips, trying to read the writing. The writings on one chip was obscured, because there seemed to be some kind of... I paused. What is it? Eric said, watching me. Hand me that magnifying glass. Eric gave me a big glass, and I swung my high-intensity lamp low, and bent over the chip, examining it closely. The reason I couldn't read the writing was that the surface of the chip had been corroded. The whole chip was etched in rivulets, a miniature river delta. I understand now where the dust had come from. It was the disintegrated remains of the chip. "Can you fix it, Dad?" Eric said. "Can you?" What could have caused this? The rest of the motherboard seemed fine. The controller chip was untouched. Only the memory chip was damaged. I wasn't a hardware guy, but I knew enough to do basic computer repairs. I could install hard drives, add memory, things like that. I'd handled memory chips before, and I'd never seen anything like this. All I could think was that it was a faulty chip. These MP3 players were probably built with the cheapest components available. "Dad, can you fix it?" "No," I said. "It needs another chip. I'll get you one tomorrow." "'Cause he slimed it, right?" "No, I think it's just a faulty chip." "Dad, it was fine for a whole year. He slimed it. It's not fair." As if on cue, the baby started crying. I left the MP3 player on the garage table and went back inside the house. I looked at my watch. I would just have time to change Amanda's diaper and mix her cereal for dinner before the pot roast came out. By 9, the younger kids were asleep, and the house was quiet except for Nicole's voice, saying, "That sounds pretty serious. That sounds pretty serious. That sounds pretty serious." She was sitting in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at herself and reciting her lines. I got a voicemail from Julia saying she'd be back by 8, but she hadn't made it. I wasn't about to call and check up on her. Anyway, I was tired. Too tired to work up the energy to worry about her. I'd picked up a lot of tricks in the last months, mostly involving liberal use of tinfoil, so I didn't have to clean so much. But even so, after I did the cooking, set the table, fed the kids, played airplane to get the baby to eat cereal, cleared the table, wiped down the high chair, put the baby to bed, and then cleaned up the kitchen. I was tired, especially since the baby kept spitting out the cereal, and Eric kept insisting all through dinner that it wasn't fair. He wanted chicken fingers instead of the roast. I flopped down on the bed and flicked on the TV. There was only static, and then I realized the DVD player was still turned on. Interrupting the cable transmission, I hit the remote button, and the disc in the machine began to play. It was Julia's demo from several days before. The camera moved through the bloodstream and into the heart again. I saw that the liquid of blood was almost colorless, with bouncing red cells. Julia was speaking. On the table, the subject lay, with the antenna above his body. "We are coming out of the ventricle, and you see the aorta ahead. And now we will go through the arterial system." She turned to face the camera. "The images you have seen are fleeting, but we can allow the camera to cycle through for as much as half an hour, and we can build up highly detailed composites of anything we want to see. We can even pause the camera using a strong magnetic field. When we have finished, We simply shunt the blood through an intravenous loop surrounded by a strong magnetic field, removing the particles and then send the patient home. The video image came back to Julia. This Zymos technology is safe, reliable, and extremely easy to use. It does not require highly trained personnel. It can be administered by an IV, nurse, or a medical technician. In the United States alone, 1 million people die each year from vascular disease. More than 30 million have diagnosed cardiovascular disease. Commercial prospects for this imaging technology are very strong because it is painless, simple, and safe. It will replace other imaging techniques such as CAT scans and angiography, and it will become the standard procedure. We will market with the nanotech cameras, the antenna, and monitor systems. Our per test cost will be only $20. This is in contrast to certain gene technologies that currently charge $2,000 to $3,000 a test. But at a mere $20, we expect worldwide revenues to exceed $400 million in the first year. And once the procedure is established, those figures will triple. We are talking about a technology that generates $1.2 billion a year. Now, if there are questions, I yawned and flicked the TV off. It was impressive, and her arguments was compelling. In fact, I couldn't understand why Zymos was having troubles getting their next round of funding. For investors, this should be a slam dunk. But then, she probably wasn't having troubles. She was probably just using the funding crisis as an excuse to stay late every night. For her own reasons. I turned out the light. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I began to see fleeting images. Julia's thighs over another man's leg. Julia's back arched. Julia breathing heavily. Her muscles tensed. Her arm reaching up to push against the headboard. I found I couldn't stop the images. I got out of bed and went to check the kids. Nicole was still up, emailing her friends. I told her it was time for lights out. Eric had kicked off his covers. I pulled them back up. The baby was still purple, but she slept soundly, her breathing gentle and regular. I got back into bed. I willed myself to go to sleep, to think of something else. I tossed and turned, adjusted the pillow, got up for a glass of milk and cookies. Finally, I fell into a restless sleep, and I had a very strange dream. Sometime during the night, I rolled over to see Julia standing by the bed, undressing. She was moving slowly, as if tired of very dreamy, unbuttoning her blouse. She was turned away from me, but I could see her face in the mirror. She looked beautiful, almost regal. Her features looked more chiseled than I remembered, though perhaps it was just the light. My eyes were half closed. She hadn't noticed I was awake. She continued to slowly unbutton her blouse. Her lips were moving, as if she were whispering something or praying. Her eyes seemed vacant, lost in thought. Then, as I watched, her lips turned a dark red and then black. She didn't seem to notice. The blackness flowed away from her mouth, across her cheeks, and over her lower face, and onto her neck. I held my breath. I felt great danger. The blackness now flowed in a sheet down her body, until she was entirely covered, as if with a cloak. Only the upper half of her face remained exposed. Her features were composed. In fact, she seemed oblivious, just staring into space, dark lips silently moving, watching her. I felt a chill that ran deep into my bones. Then a moment later, the black sheet slid to the floor and vanished. Julia, normal again, finished removing her blouse and walked into the bathroom. I wanted to get up and follow her, but I found I could not move. A heavy fatigue held me down on the bed, immobilizing me. I was so exhausted I could hardly breathe. This oppressive sense of fatigue grew rapidly and overwhelmed my consciousness. Losing all awareness, I felt my eyes close and I slept.